So, we're gonna talk about promortalism and we'll be doing some responding to this dogs outside. Responding to some of this, the Exploring Antinatalism podcast. It's with Emma Sullivan and special guest host Daily Negativity and the wonderful Amanda. So, yeah, I watched it and it's now my conversation with Amanda. It made me think about people have for I thought it was really I argue it's really simple. The position is very simple, and if you are an antinatalist, then it's there's just no way to evade the argument. But I watched more than half of it, and the difference between this version and what I argue for, the one key point is the infliction of harm. That's why I think if you have to take the ethicist pill first, you have to take all these black pills, and then you know you'd see ethicism is the dissection, I say, of reality, and promortalism is the conclusion. I can even say antinatalism, blue button that sterilizes the whole planet. That's slow promortalism, so we don't even need the word antinatalism, right? So, I mean, it's let's just watch listen to some of this and let's see what thoughts do I get. But yeah, I'll make the position very clear in this video.
Antinatalist, right? Because I think that you get promortalism from antinatalism. So in those moments where I'm compelled to believe.
So she's, it just took me off at first because, you know, like she's had a child and it's just that's why I think the academia thing is just really, you know, it becomes really redundant because there's just talking about they're just doing word games and all, and I like to talk about reality, right? Yeah, so I think that's what's more important, but whatever.
Believe compassionate antinatalism is the right view, then I think I'm a promortalist as well. But actually, and maybe I'll think more today, I've never thought sort of seriously about promortalism as an independent position rather than one that follows from antinatalism. And as an independent position,
I'll give you the independent position. The argument being made by me is existence has a price, has a cost, and the cost is paid by pain and suffering. In the currency is pain and suffering. The negative, you just put that as a negative. The discomfort, the bad feelings, right? So, and we know one main fact now that everybody can agree with it. It's very simple. We are alive and we are going to die, right? And that now, to be logically consistent, you have to apply it to all sentient beings because yeah, their brains too, and they're gonna die as well. So the question becomes, why prolong it? Now, I argue that there's no necessity for life, so it's unnecessary pain and suffering, unnecessary negatives being experienced by sentient beings. So why prolong the unnecessary negatives? Why do they need to be prolonged, right? So now the thing with how I'm looking at it is that death is is not a bad thing for the being who is now dead. Which daily negativity, if you watch his videos, he's saying the same thing. But my addition to that is an earlier death is better than a later one, later inevitable one, right? Because the more you are alive, the more sentience is alive, the more negatives are going to fall on it. So the sooner it ends, the sooner cessation, like of cessation is the answer, right? Even if you're an anti-natalist, you're for cessation, slow cessation. So I can just say, you know, you don't need anti-natalism, but it's cessation is the win, right? Cessation of sentient life on the planet is the win. And yeah, that's the main, that's where I come to the red button, right? I think that's the most important part of the promortalist, right, philosophical view, is that if you can press the button which ends it instantaneously, or even an hour, or even it takes an year, I would say, yeah, it's you should be obligated to press that button. So it's like, uh, you know, like death is not bad for the being who's dead, right? Because there's no, like, there's no some hell or anything. There's no you when once the brain is not conscious. So yeah, there's nothing bad about it. Just like there wasn't any you when you weren't born. Now, now the thing is that the other thing is death is inevitable, right? We're not immortal. Any sentient being is not immortal. So it's gonna, even if somebody thinks it's bad or whatever, like Benatar says, oh, when your life gets worse, then then you can say, okay, let's talk about assisted suicide. But I think that's just stupid. Like, you just, the pointlessness of existence, meaninglessness of existence should make one say, yeah, let's just end this stupidity for good.
Recoil from it seems to me it could well be true. I guess I just need to think about the arguments in its favour in order to tell you whether I find it an attractive kind of standalone view. So the question of whether I'm a promortalist is kind of parasitic on the answer of the question of whether I'm an antinatalist. Right? So if yes, antinatalism, then yes, promortalism, but kind of not really thought about it as an independent view yet.
Okay, fascinating. Well, connected to that, I'm just curious, have you ever actually spoken to an antinatalist promortalist, or promortalist as a standalone? So Daily Negativity here is a promortalist. I don't know, Daily, you'll have to tell us, would you consider yourself a promortalist independent of your antinatalism, or how do you feel they are connected?
Right. I think they're both views are sort of based on my pessimistic view of life. So the
I would say, like, the negative utilitarian. Now again, this is just philosophical jargon and all. It's just, at the end of the day, reality is what's important. So it's like negative utilitarianism will, if you're being consistent with your view that negative utilitarianism is the right answer, then yeah, it will lead you to promortalism. There's just, because the principle is the there's nothing justifies the pain. It has to be prevented. All the pain has to be prevented. So, and yeah, once all sentient beings are dead, cessation, then all the pain ends and it gets prevented.
Natalism is based on that, and also the promortalism. And maybe I'll say more about this later, but essentially, the way that I derive my promortalist view is just by really just combining, deprivationism, which is a view about death, with a pessimistic view of life, and that's.
And again, like you read in Juven's paper, it's you don't necessarily have to be against death, right? You can recognize the fact that an earlier death is gonna happen. It's gonna happen. You can't escape it. It's gonna come. So an earlier one is better than a later one. Even if you think that it's bad, you can recognize, that continued existence is negative. So, and that is inevitable. You just can't evade this stuff. This truth will trap you that death is inevitable. It's gonna happen. It's no matter how much you would want to live, and that's like one of the reasons I'm a pro-mortalist, because there's no counter argument to it. The only counter arguments are, oh, I want to live and I can. Same for veganism, for meat eaters. Same for natalists. I can and I want to. I can live and I want to live. You know, that's why I don't press the red button, or don't end my existence. And they don't go into the deep, the imposition of death. That are deeper, harder questions. And I've talked about this before.
Kind of all it is for me. So the connection is just that they're both based on this pessimistic view.
Yeah, excellent. All right, thank you for sharing that, Daly. How did you originally get interested in writing about the subjects of both antinatalism and promortalism, Emma?
This is a really boring answer. I read Benatar, right? And I was like, well, so I was an undergraduate at the University of York, and the very first paper set in my ethics module was Benatar's Why It's Better Never to Come Into Existence. And I was 18 at the time. I read that. And I was really taken by it. I found it really exciting, actually, and compelling. And I guess it just stayed with me as I progressed through my studies. And then I went to South Africa for a postgraduate conference when I was doing my PhD, and I met Benatar at another event that I was attending then.
I don't understand why you had a kid.
And I had a quick chat with him, and I was quite excited to meet him because I remembered I read this paper 5 years ago and I really loved it. And then he told me that he had this book. So I went home, read the book, thought it was excellent. And then the opportunity came up to write about it, so I just sort of took that opportunity because I found it also interesting. As for promortalism, I don't remember exactly how we settled on that on the first paper, but I can guess, thinking about my own psychology, I can guess it went something like this. I'm quite attracted to Epicureanism about death, which is the view that death doesn't harm she who dies. And I was unsatisfied.
Yes, it doesn't. That's the like you could say dying harms the one, but again you have to do the calculations. The calculations are what matters here. Is the harm that will be imposed on you for dying, is it same in weight as the harm will be experienced by other sentient beings if you're alive? So it gets trickier. It gets harder.
Satisfied with Benatar's treatment of it in the 2006 book. So it seemed to me that if Benatar's asymmetry and Epicureanism were true, we'd arrive fairly straightforwardly at promortalism, and so my papers have been...
Yeah, the asymmetry argument, the asymmetry argument is like for a being who wasn't born, right? And you can just read June's paper, and he just makes another column. If he ceases to exist sooner than later, why is that better too? So for individuals, for a like Amanda and we've talked about this, and we were like, yeah, as long as the machine is on, we're in harm's way. The machine is off, we're out of harm's way. So the sooner it gets off, the better, because more harm will be prevented, and it will be prevented for good.
In part devoted to exploring that connection.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for your window into that. And I didn't realize that you'd been engaging with Benatar since the 1997 paper. So yeah, you've been engaging with this for a long, long time. You've spoken a little bit about this already, but if you care to give some more details, I'd love to if you could tell us a little bit more about your other areas of research.
Let's just jump forward.
Horrific, right? And before you read kind of Benatar, you think, right, well, maybe that's people with terminal illnesses or sufficiently debilitating health conditions. But then you go and read Benatar and you go, oh, it's all of us actually, right? Turns out all of our lives meet the bar of being sufficiently burdensome. And if you take that seriously, you might take it that kind of any conditions relating to life being sufficiently burdensome for some right to kick in, you might think that that's met by many, many more lives. than might originally be thought. So I think they're kind of natural allies. Although, I'm a philosopher, right? So I'm looking for the coherence of various positions. I can see the coherence of a position which said that compassion-based antinatalism is true, all human lives are horrific, but you don't have the right to die, right? Now,
So yeah, when it comes to the right to die, like it's very important, right? Because it's a different subject, but it's linked in the sense that if there is a right to die, euthanasia tomorrow, then that excuse of oh, it's a risky way to die or a horrific way to die goes, right? And I be consistent in my view that if you have to be you have to be risk averse, that if whatever you're gonna do, maybe you won't be successful in your attempt to check out, and then you might even cause more harm by living a more dysfunctional life, you know so yeah, you have to do if you have the sure way. Now I wouldn't even say, even if it's painful or it's undignified, if it's sure, yeah, you have to take it. And they get into this required promortalism stuff and all that, and we keep moving on.
I don't know enough about the topic to kind of fill in those details, but it seems to me that could be coherent, right? And you might have somebody who says that the absence of that right is one of the compounding factors of the horrendousness of existence, right? It's so bad, but you don't have this right to die, and that's kind of what makes it worse. So I think that antinatalism is compatible with right to die, but also kind of the opposite view. And then you asked me about veganism. I think veganism is much more tightly aligned with antinatalism.
And it's not just like, they think that if you go vegan, that solves the problem. No, it doesn't. Like I give this question, right? There, people talk about activism and stuff. So I give the question that you can get a person to become to get a vasectomy to go vegan, right? I just need them to accept death as an earlier death, and yeah, that would just take they don't need to be vegan. They don't need to get a vasectomy or hysterectomy or whatever. You know, they like the animal, right? The feral cat. You don't need to. You don't need to wake the cat up once you've put it to sleep to, just sterilize it. You don't need to wake it up. So yeah, there's no harm in 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 cessation. So it's like even if you're vegan, you're part of the system. You're part of you're paying in the system. The system that produces suffering. So it's not it's the win is suicide. The win is checking out. The win is more and more people checking out. So I don't need them to go vegan or anti-natalist or whatever. I just need them to go to sleep and not wake up. That's that's more simpler in my opinion.
Of both compassion and ecological varieties. It's hard to see how those antinatalisms wouldn't have veganism as a natural ally, given the environmental consequences of rearing animals, and also given that animal lives are presumably pretty horrific too. Benatar certainly thinks that, I think. So if you wanted to consistently be an antinatalist without thinking that you at least ought to be a vegan, I think you'd need to also say, that animals don't suffer, or that their suffering isn't morally relevant, or that it's only permissible to eat roadkill, or whatever. And for what it's worth, I think the first two of those claims are wildly implausible. So I think that if you're an antinatalist, you probably ought to be a vegan, at least in theory. Yeah.
Excellent answers. Thank you so much.
I mean, yeah, if you're gonna be against procreation and then you're paying for it, yeah. But whatever, it's like you, right? You've had a kid. Like Amanda said that, yeah, there are antinatalists who've had kids, but you even got the argument and you still had a kid. So it's not just about the person himself. It's about the game. That's why aphilism is important. The whole game, the whole game is what matters, not the one individual. And like, if you do the asymmetry thing, the asymmetry for an individual, it's better for it to not be born. And if it's born, it's better for it to cease to exist sooner rather than later, as soon as it can. So, but it applies to the whole game, because this is not a single player game. Again, in Mendham's main fact, it's not a single player game. It's a multiplayer game. So what happens on the board is what matters. What happens to one piece is not what matters in the big picture. So red button is the win.
For that. Yes, I've been a vegan for 6 years strong. I believe Daly is as well. Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. In addition to being a philosophical position, antinatalism over the last 10 years or so has become a social movement as well. What's your general exposure to this side of the philosophy as social movement, and what's your opinion of the pro-life arguments for non-pro-mortalism work? We conclude that pro-mortalism follows from his antinatalism. As such, if it is always better to
Yeah, this is the paper. Wait, let me go back a little bit.
lives are awful, it follows that we would be better to kill ourselves.
Wait a second.
One last question before we move on to your papers. Outside of Benatar, have you done much research into other antinatalist thinkers and other arguments for antinatalism? Such as your first paper on the subject of antinatalism and promortalism, the 2012 collaborative effort between you and Mr. Rafe McGregor, and yourself, entitled "Better No Longer to Be: The Harm of Continued Existence."
Yeah, that's a very good statement, right? But they're still like they're not getting into the infliction of harm argument. That's a and the logical consistency that it doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter if the suffering happens in this brain, or in some other brain. It just doesn't matter. It's the same thing. So the infliction of harm is a very strong. That's my argument for promortalism goes like this: the pointlessness of existence itself. It's pointless, and pointlessness is a bad thing, and it shouldn't be perpetuated, right? The risk of suffering, the risk of imposing suffering, the risk of just being humble and understanding that we're not in control here. Anything could happen, and yeah, that should make us be like, yeah, let's get out now, because anything could happen. We might not be able to get out. So yeah, it's the risk, the the pointlessness, the risk of suffering and imposing suffering, and the guarantee of imposing suffering too, because like you're living and you're paying in the system, and no matter what you do, you're gonna impose. Life is an imposition. At the end of the day, you can't evade that argument. So that one is good, and death is inevitable. So these three things, these pointlessness, there's no point to any of this. The risk of suffering and the inevitability of death will make you come to the conclusion that it's best that for a sentient being, for this one being, if you do the risk assessment, it's better that it doesn't wake up when it goes to sleep. I use it in that terminology. And the same applies for all the other sentient beings too. So yeah, that would be that. I don't think there's a counter argument to anything. Like these three arguments that I've given, there's no counter argument to that. None. It's pointless. It's risky and dangerous, and it will end inevitably. What else is there?
I begin by reading out the abstract of this piece.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Abstract. David Benatar argues that coming into existence is always a harm, and that for all of us unfortunate enough to have come into existence, it would be better to never have come to be. We contend that if one accepts Benatar's argument for the asymmetry between the presence of and absence of pleasure and pain and the poor quality of life.
Yeah, but you can't evade the argument that, yeah, for one, the asymmetry, for one, it's better that it's not born. And the asymmetry, for one, it's better to cease to exist than continue existence. Cease to exist sooner than continue and cease to exist later. Yeah, for one, it's. You start with the one thing, and yeah, you just can't evade the logic of it. It applies to all the other sentient, all the other things that have the property that would put them in the properties that would put them in the category of sentience. So yeah, it's about the whole game, and that's why I say Ephilism is the dissection of the whole game, and Promortalism is the conclusion.
One must also accept that suicide is preferable to continued existence, and that his view therefore implies both promortalism, antinatalism, and promortalism. Pardon me. This inclusion has been argued for by Elizabeth Harman. She takes it that Benatar claims that our lives are awful. It follows that we would be better to kill ourselves. Harman, 2009. Though we agree that with Harman's conclusion, we think that her argument is too quick, and that Benatar's argument for non-promortalism deserve more serious consideration than she gives them. We make our case using a tripartite structure. We start by examining the prima facie case for the claim that promortalism follows from Benatar's position, presenting his response to the contrary, and furthering the dialect by showing that Benatar's position is not just that coming into existence is a harm, but that existence itself is a harm.
Exactly, existence is the harm. That's a good point. Existence is the harm, and not just harm for one of the sentient being. It's harm for all the sentient beings who exist.
We then look at Benatar's treatment of the Epicurean line, which is important for him as it undermines his anti-death argument for non-promortalism. We demonstrate that he fails to address the concerns that the Epicurean line raises, and that he cannot therefore use the harm of death as an argument for non-promortalism. Finally, we turn to Benatar's pro-life argument for non-promortalism, built upon his notion of interest, and argue that while the interest in...
Yeah, exactly. I've made a response to this too in my Benatar versus Promortalism video, and it's like it's for your best interest. It's best that you check out for a sentient being's interest. It's best that it ceases to exist. Yeah, because if it's alive, there's nothing bad about that, first of all. And once it's alive, and it's inevitable, that is inevitable too. The key thing is, once it's alive, it's always going to be at the risk of suffering. It's always going to be that way. So there's the interest is to check out. The interest should be to check out. The interest shouldn't be, yeah, let's just keep on playing.
Continued existence may indeed have moral relevance. It is almost always irrational. Given that neither Benatar's anti-death or pro-life arguments for non-promortalism work, we conclude that promortalism follows from his antinatalism. As such, if it is always better never to have been, then it is better no longer to be. First off, the most basic of questions: what led to the writing of this paper?
So as I said earlier, I read Benatar's Better Never to Have Been as a graduate student, and as it happened, soon after I did, Thaddeus Metz issued a call for papers for a special issue of South African Journal of Philosophy on Benatar's antinatalism. And so together with Rafe, we submitted an abstract which was accepted for presentation at the workshop on antinatalism, and then that led to our co-authored paper. So we presented it there and got some feedback, kind of made some adjustments, and then that was published the following year.
Okay, excellent. So I have a number of sort of loose, thoughts that this paper inspired, and I hope that sort of what I've prepared is all right. I mean, I'd like to sort of jump to the postscript, and you say that after a presentation of this paper, a distinction was raised between two kinds of promortalism, one which would recommend committing suicide now, and another that would recommend doing so later, when one's life becomes sufficiently bad. We want to claim that Benatar's antinatalism commits him to the first of these versions of promortalism.
Yeah, because it's the longer you are here, every minute, every day, there's you're always at risk, and the risk of causing suffering, and the inevitable, like what you're buying, and the system that you're paying in, is there's just no way to win. So you have to do it now. Yeah, but then again, the argument comes for, the like methods, right? And it should be sure. You should have a sure method, because if you fail, then you are at the risk of, even causing more suffering, and experiencing more suffering. So you have to do it right. That's why the right to die, right to check out peacefully, is very important.
But one might think that his position only commits him to the
And that's the only thing that's important now, in my opinion, to checking out.
second. And I just wanted to make a quick comment on this, and both of you please feel free to jump in any time. I'm personally not sure. I don't know if there is a real distinction to be made between quick and slow promortalism as it stands in relation specifically to Benatarianism and the asymmetry. I mean, I've gone back and forth on this subject so many times. It's been a very difficult puzzle to kind of pull apart. I will say that in looking at the more long-term idea of promortalism, that it would be good to commit suicide later when one's life is sufficiently bad. I guess my question here is, what separates this from the right to die movement as a human rights issue?
I'll tell you what, like, right to die is a right of an individual, um, choosing to go to sleep and not wake up. So again, they don't necessarily need to be having a really bad life. They can just say that I'm a pro-mortalist, and I don't want to take the risk of existence. I don't want to play the game, and that's what I'm gonna do too. I won't be playing the game longer. So yeah, it's like I'll be out soon. The thing is, with the in this argument of yours, you're just factoring in the being who's gonna suffer, right? At old age or whatever. You're not factoring in all the imposed suffering on that being, on other sentient beings, by just him merely existing.
I mean, aren't we now at this time living in a world without that as a human right? And if we were given that right tomorrow, would we even still be calling this pro-mortalism? Like, are we attaching this loaded term to something which, at the minute we're living in a time where this thing that we should all have a right to decide for ourselves, it is, wouldn't this just simply be the freedom to plan for one's life, including one's death? And
The
so,
problem is, one's life will have a price, and one's life, if it continues, there will be risk of suffering, and one's life is pointless.
I mean, you've already spoken about sort of the right to die and its relation to antinatalism, but I find it to be a strange and murky connection between promortalism and the right to die. Do you have any thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, so the first thing you said was that you kind of weren't sold on the distinction between kind of quick and slow promortalism, and actually I'm not sure about that anymore either. So that 2012 paper was a long time ago, and I think things have moved on a little bit. And I talk about that in my more recent papers. So Benatar says that it might make more sense for people who are in the better parts of their lives to delay until the worst bits start to occur. And I say,
Why? Why? Why delay? Why delay the inevitable?
two things about that, which is that, although some features of our predicament vary across time, right? So for some people, those features, like those related to bodily discomfort, might be more appalling later in life. At least some of the kind of more mundane qualities that make for appalling lives, according to Benatar, are kind of present right from the off, right? So even if our lives tend to become worse worse over time. It seems to me that at any given point that you might like to look at, if you take Benatar seriously, they're pretty bad, right? And second, even if our earlier lives are only minimally appalling in terms of quality, right? So we're healthy, we're not the victims of crime or whatever. Even those days are marred by the more kind of by those other components of the human predicament. You know, so our lives are always meaningless. We're always going to die. We're always going to be annihilated. And so I'm not actually sure anymore that there's much road in distinguishing between quick and slow promortalism as it relates to Benatar's antinatalism. But the right to die stuff. So I guess that I think that the right to die movement needn't be committed to saying that death is better for people, and that's why I think it's good to distinguish it from promortalism.
I mean, that is that's the distinction between them, between these two subjects. But I would still say, like, death is always better, because again the more you are alive, the more you are likely to suffer, and the more you're likely to cause suffering. So you being dead is better. It's better, not for you. For you, it's better that you're dead. You have to take this. You have to take this pill. You have to take this black pill. This is the darkest of the dark. This is the simplest solution. It is better that you cease to exist rather than you continue to exist. It is better for you, and it is better because your existence has a price, has a cost in terms of infliction of suffering, in the real currency here. So the more you are alive, the more you're going to be causing that. The more sentience, the more players are playing the gladiator war game, the survival DNA game, the more suffering.
Whereas I take it promortalism is committed to something like that, to it being better, or it being good, or it being required. So a view which had it that you ought to be able
it is required when you add in, like, let's say there's no harm being done by your existence. Okay, then it would be, even then I would be again consistent, indifferent. If you cease to exist, if somebody shoots you or lets you live, it'd be indifferent to that. Because again, that can't be a bad thing. We don't have any evidence that once you're unconscious you will feel pain. So it's not bad. It's not bad. Death is not bad. It can't be bad.
to plan the course of your life, including your death, needn't also say that death is better or good or required. So I do think there is a bit of logical space between those two positions.
I just feel like if we had the right to die, there's a bit of what promortalism is that would sort of collapse at that point. Like it just feels that way to me. But again, I probably am getting.
I don't think so, because people still choose to perpetuate existence. Even if you give them the right to die, they'll still just be like, yeah, I want to live, and that's where it all boils down to, right? There's all this stuff. This boils down to this human, the sentient brains wanting to live, wanting to be alive, and that's where all the problem is.
Getting a bit lost in the way people define it, and the differences in the way people define it. And I'm just not sure. These are my loose associations.
No, well, I guess something.
Yeah, my episode is gonna be on the Exploring Antinatalism podcast as well, and I bring the infliction argument in that, and I think that's that's a done deal argument. The risk and the infliction, it's a done deal argument, and the pointlessness too. Like, what are we doing here, for fuck's sake? Why do you need to be alive, for fuck's sake?
Be a very strong right to die proponent, but think that death is very, 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 very bad, right? I mean, I take
That's very inconsistent. This is, it's going to happen, and life is bad because if you're gonna be alive, you're gonna have to die. So life, the problem is existence. The problem is sentient, conscious, experiential reality existence. That is bad. That is not bad. Can't be bad.
But Benatar is in that kind of position, right? He's not a pro-mortalist, but he very much.
Yeah, he's inconsistent. He's very inconsistent.
Die person. So.
When it comes to promortalism.
But I take it pro-mortalism is kind of for death. It says, you should have the right, but also it's a good thing, right? So that seems to me the difference between the two positions.
Okay, I see. Moving on from that, though, and perhaps...
And it's like, for a sentient being, it's better that it ceases to exist. And the logical imperative of that is you euthanize, that sort of like promortalism activism too. Like one form of activism is like, you get more people out. Like I said, if you don't need to get them vegan or antinatalist, you just need to just check out, man. Just check out. And more people do that, the better you take the win. So if somebody watches my video and decides to check out, excellent, very good, man, very good. You're being logical. So that's one thing. And the other one form of activism is that you, like, I see insects. Whenever I see an insect, a bug, I give it an instantaneous death, like right then and there, boom. Because I know I won't go to jail and there won't be any other repercussions for that. So yeah, one thing is that you start euthanizing, killing, whatever, trying to give as near as an instantaneous and peaceful death to all the other animals. And yeah, when you factor in the whole game, then you're like, fuck, it's too messy to do it just this one by one thing. We gotta look for something quick and painless, no fear, no suffering for all sentient. And that's they don't talk about that.
We've resolved this, but I'll keep going. I mean, now looking at the idea of quick promortalism, the idea that one should die now, there is an inconvenient part to this that I think inconveniently, but is just true. If your primary goal is to avoid all suffering, and yes, I mean, when the machine is on, we're in harm's way, and when the machine is off, we're not in harm's way anymore. That's just a fact. And that's sort of...
Yeah, Amanda is consistent with that.
Its own inconvenient truth. However, this is where I'm slightly afraid of promortalism in today's context, because most of us simply don't have a great way of ending our lives.
Yes, we should have sure ways. But again, I'm arguing for sure and reliable, right? I don't necessarily even have to argue for peaceful, because you can say, then you're just saying my suffering is more important than the suffering that I will cause tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and the day after tomorrow, and so I would want it to be peaceful and all that. I'm going out a peaceful way. But I'm just saying I'm just being consistent with my philosophical view that you need to have if you have a sure way, like a gun, just take it, depending on the bullet and where you hit it and all that, even it would be undignified. It still becomes an imperative. But yeah, you can just say I can live and get more people out, and maybe if I live and I get the right to die for all, then that would be a really, really good form of promortalism activism, that now everybody can just go out peacefully.
In order to do it now, we would have to do it badly. And I fear that I have lost friends of mine, like Jun Hung, who, in wishing to be logically consistent with this implied speed of promortalism, made decisions that caused them to die really badly.
Yeah, it can happen. These are the risks of being alive. So again, you have to have a sure way to go. And I'm really sorry about June.
As a result, I mean, Juwon's
like how he went.
Very impulsive from all for a fact, Benatar would not condone. He's perfectly solid in his advocacy for the right to
No,
die.
but he says, I watched one of his interviews on The Brain in the Vat, in which he says, just because if existence is meaningless, that doesn't mean that you have to end your existence. We can talk about assisted suicide if you're suffering from if you're terminally ill or something. So even he doesn't get it.
But he
You don't need to be suffering to check out.
would never advocate that people should do it badly. I'm quite sure that he would say
People should make sure it gets done. That's my argument. It's done.
this is whatever utility you have while alive to fight for better access to things like the right to die, antinatalism, other causes. Like, that's what you should be doing while you're still here. I think that's part of what he would say anyway. I think he would say to some degree that we should probably stick around to do something about those things, and that we shouldn't give in to, again, the speed of promortalism. Any thoughts on that, Daly, if you do as well?
Yeah, so I know that some people think that it's kind of incoherent or at least inconsistent to be a kind of walking, talking promortalist, right? Why?
No, I've talked about this before. It depends on what the situation do, right? If you're living it, you're causing the least amount of harm, and you have to talk about it. Like, even if you're checking out, you can just write something down and make a video and talk about promortalism and then check out. So it lives on. The philosophical view lives on, even though June's gone. So it's not a like, again, this whole thing of oh, but why are you alive then and all that. It's such a myopic thing, and yeah, like she's inconsistent. She's a promortalist and she's had a kid. It's just yeah, but it's the whole big picture is what's important.
She's still here if you think that it's. But I think those people are wrong about that, right? I just think that it's going to depend what your promortalism looks like. So you might think it would be better if all humans went extinct, but you might also think that you ceasing to exist is not the best way to pursue that goal, especially when you combine the position with antinatalism.
I mean, what are you gonna do here? Like, what like even if you reduce the suffering, it's not good enough. You have to end it. Death is the end of suffering. Death is the end of suffering. Death is the end of suffering.
And you might think exactly as you were saying, that kind of activism towards curtailing procreation would be a more productive way of putting your theory into action. Or you might be a promortalist who thinks that death.
No, like, somebody can watch me, like, I checked out, and like, yeah, this person was consistent, and yeah, it's he lived and died for what he believed in. So that would be, people might be inspired by that, and they would less likely to have kids and continue their existence. Or so it depends.
It's good for the one who dies, but you might also think that good need not be an immediate one. And so, although I see the kind of what seems to be an obvious dissonance present when we see a walking, talking promortalist, I think it depends on
it's not a dissonance. It's like promortalist couldn't have a sure way to go, and he could recognize that if he uses a method that he's around people who will resuscitate him or something, then it doesn't get the job done. So he's not a walking, talking, cognitive. That's not what it is. It gets deeper than that.
The details of the position, and when you combine it with antinatalism, and again the details are needed, I can see how you can consistently hold those views and yet continue on. That seems entirely kind of fine and appropriate to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on something you just said, I mean, I don't know if you know this, but the most common argument that antinatalists receive back towards their antinatalism is, why don't you just go kill yourself? That
Exactly. That's very myopic. And I even have an argument to that. Yeah, give me euthanasia, I'll kill myself right in front of you. Give me or even better, just don't even tell me about it. Shoot me in the back of my head without even me knowing, please.
what we hear time and time again. It's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to Daly.
And it doesn't solve the problem, right? This again, the whole board is what matters. The red button is what's the most important question. And it's people have backed out of it, and I think that's discouraging. They're not talking about how do we end sentient existence on this planet.
It's happened to all of us time and time again. What do you think about that? I mean, given what you believe about pro-mortalism and antinatalism, do you think people are hitting on something important when they say that, or they're just being jerks, or what's your impression of that?
I think it's pretty poor. It's pretty crude, right? So as we've already said, there are lots of ways of being a pro-mortalist, antinatalist, and that being kind of consistent with choosing to continue on without getting kind of tangled up in logical inconsistency, right? So you could just think your efforts are better spent in activism. It could be that your particular version of pro-mortalism doesn't recommend ending one's own existence. Or, hey, you know what? It could be like just an irrational love of life. And it's okay.
I mean, realistically, right? Realistically, what would be like? What could an average person do here? I think there's nothing for it to do. It's just check out what there's like. I can look in the eye of in anybody's eye and just say there is no hope, none. It's never gonna get better. It's not gonna fix. It's gonna end the heat that will end it. So yeah, just check out while you have the chance.
To be rational, that's kind of fine. And of course, there are also arguments for the claim that antinatalism doesn't get you to pro-mortalism, right?
And I think that's just inconsistent. That's just being really inconsistent.
To take those seriously, you've got to be intellectually humble enough to take those seriously. And I think that, although I disagree, I think Benatar makes a really good case for that. So I think people who say that are kind of not paying sufficient attention to the nuances of pro-mortalism and ways in which it can be consistent with continuing on. It's also, highly demanding of one being completely rational and, behaving in ways consistent with all of their beliefs, which I think is a little bit unrealistic, given human psychology. And also,
that's a problem. Considering psychology with philosophy, that's a problem. Even if they don't want to die, that didn't change the fact that they should die.
Either positions don't collapse into one another after all, and there are very good arguments for that. So I think it's pretty poor to react in that way.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you for that. All right, I have two more questions, and then I'm going to hand it over to Daly. So the first one is just a bit of your impression is sort of a bit of how pro-mortalism fits into some of the history of all this. So what I'm about to say, many will disagree with, and that's fine. Disagree with me in the comments below. Pro-mortalism is one of these ideas that I think really scared antinatalists who started their antinatalism somewhere between.
Yeah, because they didn't take the full truth. They took the half truth.
The first release of Better Never to Have Been, 2006.
And the truth is very simple. Existence, continuing, you're a part of it. Continuing is bad. Existence ending is better because there's nothing bad about. There's nothing bad in the fact with the fact that there are non-existent that there are no Martians there. There's nothing bad about it.
Because of the way Benatar uses it, Better Never to Have Been. And let's say 2010, which was right before the antinatalist YouTube boom. And that's where I came in, for the first time. And that was also slightly before papers like yours and Christopher Belshaw's emerging, making these types of claims. And right before a lot of things started to change. If you came into antinatalism again between 2006, 2010, you were witness to an antinatalism before a lot of other ideas started to be brought in, like promortalism, like Ephilism, like the red button, the amorist.
Yes, that now these are important ones. Aphorism, red button. Yeah, this is the real. These are the real questions.
Symbiotic relationship with both veganism and the right to die, atheism, as we've discussed. This was a time of a kind of more pure antinatalism, as I think many of that particular era would see it, where we finally had Benatar. We were moving away from whatever proto-antinatalism is or environmentalist pre-antinatalism, and it led to it was a more narrow focus of what antinatalism is. But the way I see it, antinatalism has evolved since that time. It's matured, and part of that maturity is the growth of some of these tentacles into these different conversations, again, like promortalism. And that's why I think we're seeing a greater acceptance, of things like promortalism, because as time goes on, this is becoming part of the identity of
The
what
one
antinatalism is.
one thing that they're not talking about is the collapse. It's we don't have much time, unfortunately. So, like, stop not having kids, as much as like it's a good thing, it doesn't solve the problem. Not having kids does not solve the problem. Ending existence, ceasing to exist, cessation of all sentience solves the problem for good. Not having kids is not even close. It's like Kevin says, the first step to a ladder, 9, 10 steps, whatever. Not having kids is very small in terms of the whole, like, again, the whole board, the whole gameplay.
Is. And it's no longer making sense not to accept the relevance of this, and the pushback to it, which is immense, by the way, is starting to look more and more like denial.
Yeah.
To a large extent, and passing the buck. I mean, it's really interesting that I don't want to get you too into the trauma of the antenatal world, but it's so fascinating to me that this is an accusation that's been leveled against antinatalism, but now a lot of antinatalists who are afraid of this concept have pushed it onto other forms of antinatalism, like it's somehow our fault. So again, it's sort of coming from a more internal historical perspective. But do you have any thoughts on anything that I've just said?
Yeah, well, obviously you guys are much better versed in the kind of social history of antinatalism than I am, and particularly the activism side. But I mean, I agree that promortalism is going to strike some folk as like really alarming, right? Especially if you take it that in holding it, you would need to do something horrifying to be consistent. As I said, I don't actually think that's true. But I think it's also important to say that I don't think there's any kind of dishonesty necessarily in folks who claim to be antinatalists and not promortalists. And that's for a few reasons, right? So there are all sorts of kind of cognitive biases that explain why people are open.
A lot of antinatalists get really upset with people when they start asking questions about promortalism, suicide, the value of living their lives, or the value of their lived experience, because they feel, those questions are kind of missing the point. Which is not entirely false. They are kind of missing the point, getting so wrapped up in life assessments, because what we're really talking about is the ethics of starting lives, of bringing lives into existence. But
Yeah, but again, like I said, it doesn't solve the problem. The existing beings are still here. Not having kids does not solve the problem. Stopping existence from perpetuating solves the problem. Stopping sentient existence from perpetuating solves the problem. This not having kids is gonna solve 0.0000001% of the suffering on this planet. The outside, the wild, it doesn't solve that problem. Where 99% of the suffering is. Not having kids is not even close to solving that.
to say that making making life assessments is somehow not a perfectly rational psychological reaction to being confronted with, coming into the harm of existence, or is I think something that antinatalists maybe need to get over a little bit. Like, of course, people are gonna make those kinds of assessments, and I don't really have a question attached to that. I just think that's a big part of what you kind of made me realize with your paper. And again, I sort of apologize because I realize I've done a pretty poor job of responding to the first paper, but these are all the thoughts that have come out of reading that first one, and I really want to thank you for that.
Oh, right. No, it's been great. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Well, I'm actually going to hand you over to Daly, and he's got some great questions about your second paper. So your second paper, Better to Return Whence We Came, from 2022. I would like to quickly read the abstract. I argue that David Benatar's antinatalism leads to promortalism, the view that it is better to cease to exist, because the human predicament, as he describes it, is a fate worse than death. Thus, continued existence is such a predicament is not preferable to an exit form. I revisit my earlier argument in order to claim that Benatar's 2006 asymmetry between pleasure and pain paved the way for promortalism unless Epicureanism about death is ruled out. I replied to Benatar's response to that argument.
Yeah, asymmetry is a really good argument for promortalism and antinatalism. But yeah, the infliction of harm is it's the nail in the coffin. And that's the thing, right? Either you are pro-life or pro-mortalist. Either you want life to continue and end peacefully or whatever, or you want it to end as soon as it can because you realize the price of it and the cost of it and the pointlessness of it and the risk of it.
Argument. Then I turn to Benatar's 2017 characterization of the human predicament and suggest that also leads to promortalism. I respond to three arguments from Benatar that seek to block the move from our predicament to promortalism. I conclude that if Benatar is right about the predicament we find ourselves in, it is better for most people return whence they came.
So, Emma, in the paper, you discuss sort of two ways that Benatar's antinatalist position could lead to promortalism. And the first has to do with the asymmetry. So as you know, lots of people think the asymmetry does not lead to promortalism, but you challenge this in the paper. Could you maybe take us through that argument?
Yeah, sure. So I take it that the controversial bit of the asymmetry is the absence of pleasure quadrant, right? The absence of pleasure is not bad. So Benatar wants to say it's not bad unless there's somebody for whom there's a deprivation. And then you add in a fairly popular account of death, upon which death is harmful because it deprives one of future goods one would otherwise have enjoyed had one not died.
But they don't need, once they're dead, they don't need, even, like, again, this is very 2 plus 2, right? Just like my fifth brother or sister isn't missing out on anything. The same way, tomorrow Blaze is missing out on something. No, there's none of that is happening. Or 10 years later, you'll have some fun or some good times. No, there's no need for that. There's no evidence that is something. There's a future version of myself wanting to say, please just keep on living. I want to live these good days in the future. That shit ain't true. So once you're dead, there's no you. Again, not once you're dead, you're back to fail safe. You're back to 100 years ago before you weren't born.
And so then you get to say, Benatar gets to say, that it's not bad that those who never get to exist don't experience the pleasures of life, but you also get to say that it is bad for somebody to cease existing, and that's because the absence of the pleasures of life for the person who died.
Yeah, it's irrational because the absence will only be relevant if you wake up tomorrow, if you're conscious, if you're alive. That's when the absence of pleasure would be bad. He's presuming that death. He's presuming that existence should prolong for this already alive, and that's just bullshit.
Would be a deprivation. And it's that point that the absence of pleasure is bad when it involves a deprivation, which does the work of recommending continued non-existence for the currently non-existent, but it doesn't recommend bringing about non-existence for the already existent, right? So the asymmetry doesn't get you to promortalism if you think that death is a deprivation.
For who? That is the deprivation for who? Who is gonna be deprived? If you're dead, if every sentient being is dead, what's the deprivation? And if you're dead, where are you? Where are you going? Are you going to some hell and saying, "Oh fuck, I'm being so deprived. I don't get to have sex anymore." That shit ain't happening.
So I just think, well, why think that, right? So as I've already said, I'm pretty attracted to Epicureanism about death, the view that the person who dies is not harmed or deprived by their death. Now, if that were the correct view, then I take it that coupled with the asymmetry, promortalism would be fairly straightforwardly recommended, right?
Yeah.
So if death is not bad and we're not deprived by it, the path to promortalism is clear and can't be blocked by appeal to deprivation. And Benetov recognises this in 2006 in the book, spends a little bit of time arguing against the Epicurean view of death. And so in 2012 I took on those arguments. I thought they didn't quite do what they needed to do. Since then, Benetov has replied to me, and in my new paper I replied to him on those points. So my argument isn't that Epicureanism about death is the correct view, but I do think the only...
It's no. So again, this is so. If you don't know about it, like I put all the stipulations and you don't know about it, nobody knows about it, and you just lights on, lights out. Why is that a bad thing? Logically, why is that a bad thing? Logically.
Is on Benetov to give us a little bit more of a robust discussion of it. Now, he disagrees with me about that and about whether it really is his job to take Epicureanism off the table, but that's the state of play, I take it, between us.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, can you tell us a little bit about what is Epicureanism? And I guess just give us a quick overview.
Yeah, I mean, I take it that it's, I don't know much about the kind of history of the view, but I take it it's the view that the person who dies is not harmed.
It's like it's like in one statement, like sleep is good, death is better, but the best of all was to not be born. So yeah, the better one is it's existence doesn't come, like being conscious and alive doesn't cut it, does not come in the you know, it does not factor in. It's the 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 person who's dead has won. The person who was not born won even a better one. And if you're alive and you're gonna spend most of your time being asleep, that is also better.
By her death. So death does not harm the one who dies. So that's basically it. So I take it that it's in direct opposition to the deprivation view of death, which says death is bad. Here's why death is bad: because one is deprived of future goods that one would otherwise.
Yeah, but the same could be argued. Why is not being born bad? Oh, it is bad. Sorry. Yeah, why is not being born bad? Oh, it is bad because somebody would be deprived of the goods of life. So yeah, then be consistent and say, yeah, it's if there's gonna be if you think you can, if you think that yeah you can give a good life to your child, then yeah, have the child then. Be consistent in that. But you say no, it's risky. It's you have to be risk averse, and same for that. Same for your continued existence too. You have to be risk averse. You have to get out as soon as you can. We have to get out as soon as we can. Sentience has to end as soon as it can.
Experience had one not died. Epicureanism just says death is not bad. The quote is something like,
And even if it's bad, it's inevitable. Whatever this is, whatever this experiential reality is, it's gonna end anyways.
Is here, we are not. When we are here, death is not, right? Death is kind of nothing to us. So one is not harmed by one's death. That's not to say that dying isn't, harmful. That can be very unpleasant, but
suffering.
one having died, one's death itself is not a harm to somebody.
Right. But on your view, on Epicureanism, we can still say that non-existence is better than existence, right? So in other words, Epicureanism is compatible with promortalism on your view.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that's what I think, that if you're an Epicurean and
that's where the main point is. He said daily negativity gets it. Like, non-existence is better than existence. There's just no way to counter-argue that. Better if you're not born, better if you're dead, and better if you're asleep most of your life than awake and playing the game.
Antinatalism seriously, then I think you kind of naturally get yourself to a promortalist position, and I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think a lot of deprivationists at that point want to say, how is this any different from our view? When Epicureans start talking about death being worse, or like non-existence being worse than existence, or in this case, we're talking about promortalism better. At that point, it almost seems like it's just I think he's just said it's like a verbal dispute, like a mere verbal dispute. Do you agree with that, or do you think that there's an important there's still an important difference here between these views? Or
yeah,
I think this is like, this is very, very simple to me. We don't need to do too much of philosophy for that. It's very simple. We're alive, we're gonna die. The more we're alive, the more likely it is we're gonna cause and experience suffering, and the inevitable suffering that will come with life. And the longer it takes, the more suffering there will be. And it's just simply logical to end sentient existence, end a sentient existence, end sentience for itself as soon as we can, because again, that's the implication of the promortalist view. We have to end existence, not just one, but for all. And it's like, it's better for you too, that you end your existence.
I mean, maybe I'm missing something, but it seems to me that the views are opposing views, right? If you're a deprivationist, then what you're doing is giving an account of what.
Let's move over a bit.
Of the limited goods of that relationship. And so, in case it's not clear, that hastening one's death is not a solution to the human predicament, and so not recommended by it. And that's because death is part.
Yeah, the thing is, you have to accept the fate too. You're alive, you're gonna die. There's just no way to counter-argue that. You're alive, you're gonna die. So life is death, essentially. Now, it could be a slowed one, it takes you 70 years to die, or you die at 15. The argument is, if you're dead at 15, it's better because you prevented you spared all the risks and risk of suffering and the suffering that you will inevitably experience, and more importantly, the one that you will cause by existing to impose on others, impose on these other beings.
Of that very predicament. But I guess it seems to me that ceasing to exist needn't get you out of all dimensions of the human predicament to be a reasonable.
Yeah, I think we should just end it. I link this in the description. Just check it out. It's overall good, but they didn't touch much on the infliction argument. The pointlessness itself is a negative thing. It's like, what's the need for it? The risk of suffering if sentient beings are alive, and the infliction of suffering risk of the infliction of what kind of suffering there could be. So, yeah, it's be pro-mortalist, be accept, or you can just name it some. You can just call it pro-non-existentist, or be like pro-mortalism or pro-non-existentism or Blazeism. My version of the thing. It just at the end of the day, it all depends on what the substance of the the view is. So yeah, I think that's enough. This is this is pro-mortalism as how I argue for it, and this is the truth, and there's no counter argument.